can play music for the baby in any room.
Can you play Ride the Lightning by Metallica?
What up, everyone? DJ Nubis.
And DJ Neko.
Here with you on the Middletown Radio Podcast with a special edition of the Cultureverse Mindset. Something that Neko and I decided to spring upon you all just because we watched a doc called We Kill for Love, which focuses on the era of the horror erotic thriller.
The erotic thriller.
And, initially this was in my list to kind of check out. It got released in 2023, but it was something I thought, well, I like watching docs about movie history and stuff like that. And so this is one that I kind of wanted to see. Threw it on, and both Nick and I got engrossed.
We really got engrossed. We were really, really watching it. And I mean, everybody remembers the Skinamax nights. And I did not, there's so much to even go over in this. But one thing I wanted to start with is.
Well, before we jump into that, let's go ahead. We're just going to give you a quick glimpse at the trailer for it. And again, this is on Shudder. It's called We Kill for Love. And it's all about the erotic thriller history and stuff like that, but we're going to dive into it right after we show you this.
When I kind of almost accidentally bumped into what looked to me like a new genre that New Hollywood was fast inventing, it struck me as a really interesting opportunity to start to think seriously about what it means for a whole new genre to appear and begin to name itself in that way. I first noticed it really on the sleeves of VHS videos in video stores and in trade press reviews. To me, I think the term became most real through those cheaper end straight-to-video films.
I think the first time I heard the term erotic thriller was probably when I auditioned for Undercover. When my agent said erotic thriller, and I said, well, what is that? Well, like 9.5 weeks.
Not a fan of the phrase erotic thriller. It just sounds a little naughty. A little naughtier maybe than I want to be.
There was always that element of danger in an erotic thriller, and it was usually the woman who was dangerous. In these erotic thrillers, these women were beautiful and sexy, but often deadly.
I like the term a lot, erotic thriller. I thought erotic thriller was exactly what it was. It was just a perfect meld of exactly what these movies were.
So there you go. A little bit of what about. And it's interesting because I do like it. This is like a 2-hour, 43-minute.
It's a very long doc.
So it's good I love when they spend time on this. This is why I like with even like Crystal Lake Memories. It's like a 6-hour doc about Jason and Friday the 13th. I really love that. Now, granted, that came out a few years ago, so they kind of missed out on the new reboots and stuff like that. But it was really well done, and you had a lot of the actors coming back to talk in that documentary and stuff. So whenever they do docs where it gives you a nice meaty length of time, like that tells me they've actually put a lot of thought into their talking.
Lots
about
of
this.
actors, lots of producers, lots of the directors all were willing to come on and talk about their time.
Yep. And so this is directed by Anthony Penta, and again, it came out in 2023. But again, you've got Jodie Fisher in there, Chloe King. We saw. I'm surprised Shannon Tweed didn't do it. Surprisingly, but you had a lot of other actresses that had been big stars during this time with some of these. But I think for us, like, there's at least 3 that stand out the most in the 80s, and they did talk a little bit about this. Of course, one of the first ones to pop up was Dress to Kill with Michael King. Angie Dickinson, Nancy Allen, and so on. But then, of course, when it came to this one, Fatal Attraction, this really kind of blew the doors open to how crazy the femme fatale could be in terms of, the guy having an affair with the woman, but the woman becoming really crazy. And one of the things that we learned through this doc was that initially they had a different ending for Glenn Close's character, and it was really more for her to be more self-destructive and to harm herself in the end. But apparently there was such a backlash from the press screenings, the test screenings, that they really didn't like her character because of how
They hated her. They didn't want her to take the easy way out, so to speak.
Yeah, it was kind of like, she's creating this destructive force within this family, even though it's initiated by Michael Douglas's character, the husband. Just some of the things she does. One of the things that I remember hearing before I even saw the movie was about the cooking the bunny.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I think at some time, because like I remember in the doc, the writer or something said he had to approach Glenn to tell her that they were changing the ending, and so she was really against that. She didn't like the idea that they wanted to kill her in the end through the wife and husband. So it's like, I think what she was afraid of is that I was going to paint women as this crazy lunatic, which really she was. I mean, let's be real. The character is very nuts in this.
Well, I think too, Glenn kind of looked at it more, I don't want to say artistically, but like she saw what a multi-level, multi-dimensional character she was playing and how deeply twisted she was. So it all would make sense, like, that after all of this and the final, like, no and final goodbye, that, yeah, maybe she would end her life.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is too, is that was, one thing they mentioned because of the character is that despite the craziness, Glenn Close's character wanted that lifestyle. She wanted the marriage. She wanted the happy family, and that's what she was craving. But because she was just the other woman, it just led down a destructive path to the Fatal Attraction, basically, is what, basically what the movie's after. Of course, sometime later we got this movie, which again, we talk about the power of the female using her sexuality to garner and get what they want out of the situations. And I remember this again being a big deal when it was released, obviously for specific reasons regarding Sharon crossing her legs and stuff, which even got parodied. And I think it's Hot Shots or something. They had done the same thing. And I can't remember, but I thought maybe maybe a bunch of Bush or something. I can't remember how they parodied it, but it was quite comical, and it just became like a running joke. But I remember, at least to some degree, Sharon saying she really hated that that moment defined her career for a long time because she could never really escape that particular film and that scene, which is sad for her, of course. But at the same time, I mean, that movie is very memorable, even outside of it, just how good that film is. And she did a great job in it. You know, they even discussed how in that scene where the detectives are all trying to quiz her, they think they have the power there, and then she does this moment, and all of a sudden it's like getting a little flushed.
Getting a little hot in here.
Yeah, it's a little hot in here. But yeah, this doc like really kind of focuses on the beginnings of erotic thrillers and how they push the lines a little bit of, you know, how much you can get away with the lovemaking versus, you know, the violence. And of course, that's something that politicians try to hone in on, not just with the horror genre itself, but with stuff like this, where it's like, are you really like, you know, are you responsible for sex and violence being cohabitative together and how it reacts to, you know, people in the everyday life, and, you know, how they try to make policies. The PMRC was very big against music, but they were also coming after movies and film and stuff like that. So
they made a really good point in this movie. They were talking about how like the 60s and 70s were all about like the sexual empowerment of women. And then you hit the 80s and with the very conservative president and people were becoming more conservative, that it almost felt like this was a natural response, because you're being, you know, you've got this conservative essence going on in the 80s, so why not our movies are now kind of becoming a little bit more shocking, to say the least, but in a different way. As they said in the trailer, a lot of times the women were the ones who were the quote unquote bad guys, and the women were the one who were using what they had to get what they want.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times that's true. Even like, you know, I always go into these arguments with people that are very much against the horror genre and how they felt like women were always sexualized. Well, yeah, sure, there were women in there. Even some of the modern stuff, independent films we watch now, TNA is still a big thing because they like to pay homage to the 80s and stuff like that. But it's not because it's so much a sexualization, it's just part of the nostalgia as well as like how those films were made. But in the end, it was always the female that was the final girl. That's why we have the final girl. Like, she's the one that overcame all the odds.
She's the survivor.
And so, but you rarely find the people that are so against horror even speak of that. They're like, well, that doesn't matter. We have to talk about the chick having sex with the guy and getting killed. But that's not really the nature of the story. That's just part of it, you know. And again, when Scream came out, they were playing off the tropes of stuff like that. Like, you can't be caught having sex and all this other stuff. But erotic thrillers, you know, they kind of went a whole other direction. They kind of, again, gave power to the women in a sense that where men usually had that power, they were the ones kind of gaining it. When I talked to you, one film they didn't really touch on too much was a film called Disclosure with
Disclosure.
So
Michael Douglas is in all of these.
Yeah, he's
the big ones.
Yeah, a lot of these films. He was a big part of that whole erotic thriller set of films. And this one, again, Demi was the one actually using the sexual power, her power position, to make Michael, like his character, like uncomfortable, and he's the one that's sort of like the victim in this. So even though this doesn't, I don't remember this one going into any kind of like violent thing. I mean, it probably got a little bit, but not to the degree that we see in some of these other erotic thrillers where it's actually people be dying and stuff like that. But this one was about the business place and how inappropriate behavior leads to bad shit. So, but it's a very good film, and Moore and Douglas again shine in that very well. Some of the other films around that time, Body Double, Body Heat, Sliver, Jade with Linda Fiorentino. There's a great movie called Malice with Nicole Kidman. That's excellent when it comes to these erotic thriller type films. Then sooner or later, obviously as we dove into the 90s a little bit, you had films like Night Eyes with Andrew Stevens. He was a guy that they interviewed in this doc, and he talked about how he spent a lot of time being an actor, but after a while, like after 86 or 92, he's like, I kind of want to do my own scripts. I want to do my own films. So he's the one that was going on the independent market,
writing them, presenting them, and he said, and I'm an actor too.
Right. So he could actually be in the films just as much as direct them or help them get them financed because they're his scripts. So like he has a series, which I never saw them, but it's pretty good. I think he's up to like 4 films in that series throughout the 90s. So, and it all deals with the whole erotic thriller.
I like the story he told about how he came up with Night Eyes, and he puts a lot of the little elements into the movie Night Eyes, where he was dating someone and he was walking down the stairs, and then this guy pops up and he's the personal security for the place. And the name of the personal security was Night Eyes. So, it was just interesting to see where they started and the different things that went from, because one thing that they really, really touched on was direct to video. Like that was their bread and butter, was going direct to video. There's all these new independent video stores. They needed things to put out there because at the time, movies, like big movies, were rarely putting things into their video stores. It was harder to get that and harder to get like, oh, I saw this in the movies, but then that really didn't come along until late 90s, where the movies, the blockbusters, were starting to put their stuff into Blockbuster.
Yeah. And that's sort of like, that kind of hurts them in a sense because and they made some really cool points because early on in the independent, like the mom and pop shops, they would have a lot of these more lower budget horror films and erotic thrillers and stuff. Not so much of the mainstream stuff. So when you could go in there, you say, okay, well, this is not really me. So I'm going to go back and see if I can find something else. But one thing they said is like once Blockbuster or Hollywood Video came along where all the mainstream stuff was, if you rented, Terminator or whatever, you're not coming back right away because you've got what you need out of this particular film. And so that kind of destroyed a lot.
You're just waiting for the movies to come onto VHS, basically.
Yeah.
I do like how they started diving into the Cinemax and how a lot of it would, as time was going on in the late 90s, they were going a different direction with their erotic thrillers. One thing, this is what I was thinking earlier, I didn't realize that Playboy had such a hand in the Red Shoe Diaries, because I remember watching that, but it wasn't on the Playboy channel. It was, I think, on
Showtime.
Cinemax or Showtime. Yeah. And I remember watching that, but it was 100% like an erotic thriller every week, a different, story. And
I remember for a little while, Playboy had their own, like, I don't want to say channel.
They did have their own channel.
Yeah, and I think that's what it was. So, like, I don't remember how you had to subscribe to. I can't remember. It's been so long, but I do remember them having their own, like, skits and stuff that was sort of like Red Shoes, but they could kind of push it a little bit further on their channel because it was more like, you had to actually pay for that one as opposed to Showtime. You had to pay for it, but it was a little bit different because they could give you regular movies, but then Red Shoe can be a little risque, but not to the point that Playboy could be with their stuff. Like they get far more aggressive with it. But so Red Shoe, of course, they talk about David Duchovny being kind of like the centerpiece to all these stories that would be told from a female point of view, and exploring their sexuality and stuff like that. But again, during that 90s period, a couple films. One film they mentioned, of course, which did start like a whole series of films, is Poison Ivy. The first one with Drew Barrymore. The second one had Alyssa Milano, and then the third one had Jamie Presley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so these girls had been like sort of big names, but not at the point that they are now. So like, obviously Jamie went on to do like more comedic stuff like Joe Dirt, and then even like TV shows later on.
It was kind of like a lull in all of their
they were, but they were all obviously very beautiful, and Jamie was even a Playboy playmate at one point, so her career started off there, and then of course she ended up becoming an actress and stuff like that. So all the stuff that she was doing. But a film that they didn't talk about, which there's so many to choose from, but this one I was kind of surprised because of how underrated it really is, and it starred Nicole Eggert, Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, called Blown Away. And this one was actually really, really fucking good when I saw it. Like, I was kind of surprised. And again, you got the Coreys in there, so they were a team a lot back then. But certainly a film worth noting if you're into the erotic thriller.
Well, that's the other thing too. This is during the Coreys' kind of like downturn in their careers. They were really big late 80s, and it just seems like the erotic thrillers were places where people landed a lot of times.
Yeah.
But some of these actresses, that's what they did. They were going from film to film. They were short, like filming maybe 10 days and then going to another film. One of the actors said he had to change his name because they'd go out on the market to sell them, and they're like, "Oh, I don't need another one with this guy." So they had to. Yeah,
because they said they had they'd always because they knew each other so well, they would do a lot of films together. But if you were trying to sell them to a retailer or to a video store
or overseas, because they were selling a lot of them overseas,
so they would just change their names on the box as their actor names, and then try to say, "Well, yeah, these are all different because these are different actors," but they're really not different actors. But that's, you had to kind of make those workarounds if you wanted to get your stuff out there and stuff. But yeah, there's some films also that they didn't really talk about, but I think would fit sort of in this category. Okay. I call these kind of like the outliers, they did touch on a couple of them a little bit, but they're ones that you wouldn't really sit there and say to yourself, okay, well, these are the same as what we saw with the 90s or the 80s, but some of the films I would say are like, Wild Things, which introduces a little bit more bisexuality in it. And then, of course, Bound also dives into lesbianism and stuff like that as well. But then other films that may not be directly, but Black Swan gets mentioned as sort of an erotic thriller. Fear with Mark Wahlberg.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely an erotic. I agree.
And even to a degree, Cruel Intentions plays upon that a little bit. Mm-hmm. But they're just not the usual, jealous boyfriend or girlfriend killing each other stuff. But they're very good stories, and they play around with the idea of eroticism and then deceiving and stuff like that. One of the things that they also started to talk about was how, after a while, when these certain actresses like Kira Reed or Shannon Tweed, and they were doing all these films, they actually really liked it, and they were doing pretty well with it. But then sooner or later, when they started trying to get, like they said, how some directors wanted more art, but then like the fandom wanted more sex, mm-hmm. and so the label and the studio is like, we need more sex because that's what they want. So obviously, they started introducing pornographic actors into these movies because they're just like, a lot of times, a lot of actresses and actors will charge you more to get naked because, of course, they're exposing themselves. Mm-hmm. Whereas porn actors really don't care. They're pretty much people that are a lot like voyeuristic as it is, so they don't care about getting naked on screen and performing. So even on one of the movies they were showing, clearly a soft porn type thing, I could see Randy Spears, who I know from the porn industry. And so obviously he's going to be very comfortable inside of that type of thing, even if he's not showing everything.
Yeah, it's just simulating. They don't even have to really do anything. They're simulating now at this point. So it's easier for them.
And a lot of times too, because I've talked about this, where even the porn industry itself was trying to get more creative and more artistic in their own ways. Like they'll shoot a full-blown porn X-rated version, but then they can go, believe it or not, go to Skinamax and sell that a softer edited version and get away with it and still make money off of it there. So that's sort of how the industry was going, because they were just like, well, yeah, let's just like this film. I saw this porn the other day, man. It's great. If we just edit it out, we can make that a movie. Like we can just throw a label on that and say, yeah, this is this movie, and here we go. But obviously that kind of pushes regular actors out, and especially these women that were used to enjoying that success, because like even though they didn't have to have sex on film, it was always assimilated, which of course led to labels thrown on them. I think it was Fisher that said that she had went one day and they said they put porn actress next to her name. She's like, what? Hold up. What are you doing? I didn't do actual porn. So they were confusing and blurring the lines to what a lot of these mainstream actresses were doing versus what was becoming just porn actors jumping into the soft core series. And Skinamax was a big part of that, where they were just making films that
because that was early days of cable TV. They didn't have a lot of things, to provide. We remember it. A lot of younger people are just used to being, you can go on TV, you can pick whatever movie you want to watch and it's there. But, HBO, Showtime, Cinemax, they only had the rights to certain things. So if they can get a group of movies that they can show, and it's reasonable for them to show it, HBO at night, Cinemax at night, Showtime at night. One thing I really appreciated, though, with a lot of the originals, they took it very seriously, and they even were modeling a lot of their movies after like Alfred Hitchcock, or the directors would take a lot of the specific shots and put them into the movies to give you kind of like a film noir feel, as well as, because they really are shooting a thriller. They're shooting a thriller. They're trying, but then it just happens to be like very erotic or very romantic. They started branching where they were getting into like the fantasy romance like type of movies too, but still it's like that thriller, but it's a different type of erotic thriller. It's more of a period piece.
Yeah, and then that also falls in line with stuff like Wild Orchid or 9.5 Weeks, where it was not so much violent, but just they were pushing boundaries. And I remember 9.5 Weeks got so much publicity because they're like, oh, this is so explicit. But we had a guy in the doc who's like, yeah, I remember seeing that as a kid and thinking, oh, this is crazy. But then years later, I'm like, oh, this is tame as hell. Like, there's just way worse than this.
And I think it's because it's the suggestion. And that's what was they were pushing, is like, you're doing it in your own mind.
Yeah.
I mean, what was some movies that you remember, because you're an erotic thriller expert, that you tend to lean towards or like to watch?
I don't know. Like I said, like a lot of the earlier ones, and again, and I think one of the reasons when they even talked about it was, in the 80s and 90s, to get porn, you would have to go into a porn store. And, we didn't have the internet like we do now. You can readily go find porn to fulfill your needs. So like, if you say to yourself, all right, I'm going to rub one out. Well, back when I was a kid, like we used to laugh about with the Playboy channel with the lines,
the squiggly line. Oh, there's a boob.
But then like if I saw something like
like the lingerie catalog in the Sears lingerie
I'm
section.
talking about just like a movie like Erotic Thriller. So let's just say 9.5 Weeks. It's very tame, but as a teen who's learning about sex and starting to like girls and all this stuff, you're kind of like, oh, this is hot, and you try to find your way with the guy not in the picture.
You're like, come on, use your imagination a little bit.
Or as we talked about with some of the stuff in the 90s with Shannon Tweed or Kara Reed or whatever, and they're showing more boobs, and even though it's not like full blown porn, it's like, oh, it's hot enough at that time. You're like, yeah, okay, I can get off to this. This is, but of course, Step Brothers, we talked about, what was it?
Good housekeeping.
Good housekeeping, yeah. So you don't have to rely on that anymore. And I think that was one thing they were talking about in the doc, is that because things are more available in terms of even pushing the envelope in terms of sex, the erotic thrillers kind of died out, even though they really haven't, because I'll get to the reason why. But
I think the erotic thriller industry as a whole is what they mean when they say it's died out. Maybe not the genre, but the independent erotic thriller industry was, they were thriving. Basically, we had basic cable where you only had so many channels, and there were like no made for TV movies because they were just basically whatever.
Yeah, I would say that, like, my point about that was that as far as like the erotic thrillers of the 90s, where it was more B-C grade movies, like that was a big thing for them, because that's sort of what helped kick off the Red Shoe Diaries and stuff like that. We do have erotic thrillers now, but they're more mainstream. It's the stuff like we had from like, Fatal Attraction and stuff. Like, they're doing more mainstream stuff, because the lower stuff just probably isn't connecting as much, because people are like, young teens now are like, I don't need that. I go over here.
I can go to free porn. Yeah.
Pornhub's got what I need. I don't need to go to this soft stuff. And that's probably why, like, I haven't really paid attention to Cinemax in a long time, but I don't think they have as many Skinemax stuff as they once did. I think it's kind of died out as well.
We're going to have to check.
But it is funny because even though these two examples I'm going to give aren't erotic thrillers, it again goes back to somehow, if you're a director and you want to have sex scenes where you're pushing the envelope, you're going to go find porn people to do that. And one was, of course, from the 70s called Caligula, which they had done, which they actually incorporated real porn people into that. There's actually an uncensored version of that film where they actually have a lot of dick licking and shit like that going on. And then Game of Thrones, even though they can't go that route because they'd be X-rated if they did get porn actors to perform pretty heavy simulated sex. So again, that's the funny thing, is that when the directors now, they're like, well, if I want to get really crazy, this is what I can do. But then on the other hand, you and I we saw a movie called Antichrist, with William Dafoe, and I can't remember the actress's name. She's been in a lot of these crazy over sexualized films, but there's simulated sex in there, and that is, we can see the sex happening. Like, and I can't remember, I think it is Dafoe, but I can't remember for sure. But either way, that's real stuff happening, and that's, again,
you see it.
Yep. And it's pretty interesting, never to say the less. So, but again, the director doesn't shroud it as a porn film. He shrouds it as lovemaking in the shower. And then, of course, we've got this like dark, satanic shit going on around it, where just people are going crazy between our two main characters. So he can get away with kind of doing it, even though it wouldn't be like a mainstream film. It's an independent film, so he can get away doing what he wants with it.
Defoe's been doing a lot of independent stuff.
Yeah, he has a ball doing it. Boondock Saints was one of those examples that just kind of took off. And
The Lighthouse.
Yeah. He loves doing it. Now he's going to do, I think he's in the Wolfman movie coming up, and he doesn't mind getting in there with the independent stuff. So, but some of the newer ones within the last 20 or so years that are, like I was talking about, where they're still kind of doing the erotic thrillers, but they're just not on the B level, would be stuff like Unfaithful, a really good film called Derailed with Jennifer Aniston and Clive Owen. This is a fantastic film. More recently, you had stuff like Deep Water with Ana de Armas and Ben Affleck. And then, of course, even though this one kind of goes into horror territory, Strange Darling also plays upon some of that erotic thriller in there as well. So there are modern films that are actually still kind of doing it. Just as you said, it's not on the same level that it once was.
It's not. This documentary really just showed the world of erotic thrillers, like everybody working together, how they would like sell their movies, market themselves, and then just as it just declined. And it was a little sad to see that, but we saw the decline of even, they were citing Blockbuster, and that bigger companies like Disney were starting to get into the direct-to-video. So because Disney is now doing direct-to-video, and they're sending not just one or two to Blockbuster, they're sending 20 copies of whatever they want to do direct-to-video. It, just basically suffocated the erotic thriller direct-to-video group. Now we can also see, as time passes, the decline of blockbusters. So like, it's just time and things changing. That's why, like, you sit in a period of time and you get nostalgic for it, because it's impossible for it to return the way that it used to, because the world is completely different than it was, 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's funny, because I liked how some of the actresses kind of talked about that, because one thing we've talked about, as you brought up, nowadays, if you are to engage in a courtship or, be with, a partner, whatever, like, especially with women, you have to be asked to kiss them, or
men are afraid to be seductive,
right? And
because you just don't know,
right? And so, like, again, you take away the spontaneity of love and desire, whereas these movies push those boundaries, because sure, at first the girl's like a little hesitant, she might be married or whatever the case, but sooner or later she's sort of desiring it. But then on the other hand, we saw moments or pieces of film where the actress's character is looking over at the garden guy, and he's half, he's got his shirt off and buff as shit, and she's in her head thinking, I really want this guy, And so, but again, it's the spontaneity that we're also, now we have to be so much careful, because men are scared of being labeled as, sexual harassers, creeps, or whatever.
predators.
Right. And so it takes away a lot of that desire that some might have. And so, it's obviously, you don't ever want to endorse hurting women or being violent and anything like that. But at the same time, if, I remember back in my days, even with you, when I first went on a date with you, I was nervous about kissing you, but I did, but you could have easily just, in the modern day, just slap me in my face, say, hey, I didn't give you permission to do that. Like, I just like, I don't even know if I would ever have called you again if I did that, because obviously my intentions are pure. But if you had been basically the modern woman and like done that, and, not understand where I'm coming from in terms of my attraction to you and how I want to court you, I'm not saying every woman does this, because I know that'd be generalizing, but that's sort of the concern that men have. So some women are out there like, oh, you just, you're over dramatic or overbearing, but you can't really say that, because there are women that would do that, like get upset that you overstep the bounds. And so, to sit there and say, hey, can I kiss you? It's kind of like, it stops the moment from being a moment. And that's where the nervousness comes in. And so I don't know, but they're right. The girls, the actresses were talking. It's like, that's what sort of make these erotic thrillers intriguing, because it does push that whole like gray area of where, either the guy feels it's wrong or the girl does, as far as the characters.
Yeah, but in these movies anyway, they're all a little bad. So
right.
it's.
Which then again, you can turn and go say, well, do we talk about when it comes to cheating, girls that, we say nice guys finish last. And part of that is because, girls are like, well, where are the good guys at? And they're like, we're out here. You girls just keep choosing all the bad boys. So there's this thing where women will do this, where they love the nice guy, the family guy, the guy that's going to, be a provider, but then it's
But
like
the bad boys are way more fun in bed.
then the guy on the bike with the jean jacket, it's like, I don't know.
Something about him.
You're right, and that's where the trouble leads. But
He's a real alpha male.
that's, again, these erotic thrillers did give women a sense of empowerment sexually, and a lot of times gave them that ability to turn the tables and become the aggressors or the ones in charge and commanding. Like even in Blown Away, that film I talked about with the Haim brother or Cory brothers and whatnot, that has a girl in the centerpiece controlling two guys to go against each other, and it's pretty crazy. And so it's really a really brilliant film, and again, just it's all part of this whole erotic thriller era. And even though this film doesn't spend too much time on each film that it was trying to discuss, it give you some insight to how the actresses and actors felt doing it, why it kind of failed towards the end, and where the new modern
And they
era.
were even saying there's thousands of films, and
Yeah.
some of them are hard to find
Yeah.
because they're all direct to video. I'm sure there's no master tape, so you just got to find a video. And when they were like selling them overseas, they were selling them to distributors overseas, and then the names would get changed, and so one would be like named something in the US, and then it would be named something different in the UK. And when you're trying to like match them up and figure out what is what, there was an author on there, and she did a lot of research and, tried to watch as many of these forgotten erotic thrillers as she could, and she was saying it's nearly impossible.
Yeah, I think the same one you were mentioning. She's like, I'd spend 12 days on one film, drive 5 hours to another set for another film, do 12 hours, then come back to the first film and do another. And she's like, because they were all kind of samey in terms of plot design, she would kind of forget where she was or what film she was on, but it didn't really matter because the topics were always the same. She could really just
get herself back into character.
Yeah, it would just take not long at all to do what she was doing because they're kind of similar in vibe. So, but yeah, it's what makes those films kind of fun back then. And obviously, I didn't pay as much attention to the Shannon Tweed stuff, even though I did see a couple back in the day, but she also did a lot of like just action films. Like she was going from erotic thrillers to like just action where she was like the badass, like Jamie Lee Curtis did and so on. But, as time went on, it just, again, the era of the internet takes away the ability to worry about these skin flicks, basically, that were pushing it at the time as a teen. But now, like, if you can get access to porn, you just don't need that because it doesn't really hit the same way. Although I'd find that looking back now, erotic thrillers, at least in terms of the sex itself, is a lot more fun because it's just, I don't need to see a guy spitting in a girl's face. I like the romantic stuff.
Yeah, porn's gotten a little ridiculous.
Yeah,
lately.
it is really bad now. Like that's just how bad modern porn is. But so you can start to appreciate the erotic thrillers for what they were doing, because even the actresses were saying that, even the directors were saying we were trying to make it to where, I can watch it, but then I can have my girlfriend sit down and watch it, and she can still say that's a hot scene. Like, that's the whole point of it. But yeah, I don't know. I really liked it. I thought it was a good doc.
Now it's making me want to go and like compile a list and try to find all these erotic thrillers starting from the 80s. And
that's the cool thing too, because once the DVDs and stuff came out, a lot of these things, as you said, started to kind of die away. But you have Shout Factory, Umbrella, Vinegar Syndrome. They're starting to go and collect and find these films, and they're starting to bring them back. There's one I didn't even mention that I really want to get my hands on because I have not seen the entire film. I've only seen the end, which is devastating, but it's called Looking for Mr. Goodbar with Diane Keaton. Fantastic movie. Now, it's not necessarily an erotic thriller, but it does deal with that kind of vibe. And so, again, it'd be one of those outliers, would it fit in that same category? But fantastic from just that last 10 minutes or so, I'm like, I've got to see this.
Now you're like, now I have to see it. Now you got me.
It's that's it, last scene, because it has Tom Berenger too, and I'm just like, that last scene, I was like, I can't believe that just happened. And so that's why I'm like, I need to see the context of everything going on, because obviously it's about Keaton's character exploring her own sexuality. I think she's like a teacher or something, and she's just going on random dates. But certainly, it's can be a little bit of a risky, for a woman to do that. So that's what that film kind of deals with. But yeah, I mean, overall, I recommend this doc highly. I think people should check it out. It's on Shudder right now. Very good if you're interested in just docs about film and about certain topics. Like this would be the erotic thriller. Obviously, the other docs they have out there is Darkness, dealing with all the horror stuff. They have like 3 volumes of that. Very highly recommended. So this is why I kind of like watch this, and I'm glad that Neko enjoyed it. She's actually the one that says we need to talk about this.
Yeah, it's. I really don't think people understand, because it's not Hollywood. That doesn't mean it wasn't a legitimate business or legitimate movies. These were real movies with real scripts and real directors, and they really found a niche that they were trying to, stay with as long as possible, because, you can't, it's impossible in Hollywood. You see that there's only a few back then that really hit that erotic thriller note. And it was a real industry, and it still could be, but to a different extent. I always kind of think like, we live in the world as it is, not in the world that we wish it was. So maybe there's a chance to revive the erotic thrillers. Maybe not the same way it was, but like you were saying, ordering it through Vinegar Syndrome, supporting the actors and actresses at different maybe Comic-Cons or other cons if they would come out and just kind of like when we went to G-Fest. So keep the erotic thriller alive.
Yep. Good words. Coming up later tonight, Silver Screen Savant with Olvin. Unfortunately, Gojiro 851 can't make it, so it's just Olvin and I, but we're going to be reviewing Van Helsing from 2004 with Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale.
Very nice.
Tomorrow, I still waiting to hear back from a friend of mine. We might have a new musical discussion about the top 10 thrash albums with Jason Stuff from Prosectomy, but hasn't got back to me yet, so I'm not really sure yet on that.
Yeah, it's tough because we're 12 hours different.
Yeah,
basically.
He's on the other side of the planet. Monday, joining forces with Kevin Lambert for Cinematic Synergy. This time it's my pick for 2014's Killers. Then Tuesday, I'm getting together with Samurai Guy as well as Rick Myers for another edition of Action Film Autopsy. Wednesday, of course, Mr. Tony Den and I are doing our Ghouls of Midnight picks. Thursday, the return of NFL football. So it'd be me, Edgar Allan Poet, and this nice young lady over here, DJ Neko, and Poetic Carnage comes back. We're going to be giving our breakdown of who we think are going to win the division, as well as going into the playoffs and the Super Bowl picks. So we're going to I think we're going to do it like basically at least 3 times throughout the season, but I think Poet and I might hit a couple other times in between. But either way, if you like NFL football, come join us. We'll talk a little bit about that. Friday, the Retro Movie Show with Kevin Lambert on his channel. We're going to be doing Passenger 57, Wesley Snipes, Always Bet on Black. And then later in the evening, Vintage Cult Cinema with Olvin, doing The Last Boy Scout with Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans. And then the end next week with Silver Screen Savant will be my pick this week, that week for Dario Argento's Suspiria 1977. So that's pretty much what's on the horizon for us here.
So you have something every single day.
Yeah, it's a busy end of the month. We're beginning of the month too, so. But yeah, thank you for the support. Hit the like and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts, not just if you've seen the doc, but how you feel about erotic thrillers in general. I think they were a waste of time, but or do you actually like them and think they actually have a good purpose? But let us know. Let us know your thoughts, and we'll see you next time on the Military Radio Podcast.
You see before you die. Find the blood.